The question should have been easy to answer. Instead, I sat there in silence, staring at the cup of tea beside my hand as though it belonged to somebody else. It had gone cold nearly half an hour earlier. Across the kitchen table, the bank's fraud officer waited, without rushing me. She had a folder open in front of her, along with several sheets of paper I hadn't yet been allowed to turn over. "Mr. Langford," she said gently, "have you ever actually seen this woman move or speak live on camera?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. For 11 months. Helen had been the first person I heard from in the morning and the last person I spoke to at night. I had hundreds of messages from her, photographs of tea beside a paperback, pictures of coastal walks, garden centers and breakfasts eaten in the sunshine, voice notes telling me to remember my tablets, messages asking whether the boiler had finally stopped making that dreadful knocking sound. She knew I listened to Radio 4 over breakfast. She knew I disliked beetroot. She knew the date Susan died. She even knew I sometimes left the landing light on, because the house felt less empty that way. Surely that meant I knew her, didn't it? I looked down at my hands. "We've spoken every day," I said at last. The officer nodded. "I understand. She's told me things she's never told anyone else." I'm sure it felt very personal. It was personal. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I took a breath. "Sorry. You don't need to apologize." I glanced towards my mobile, lying face down beside the sugar bowl. Only that morning, Helen had sent a voice note saying she loved me. Her voice had sounded tired but warm. She'd promised that once everything was sorted, she would return to Britain and we'd finally spend a weekend together in Bath. She had joked that I would regret inviting her because she intended to stop in every antique shop along the way. I had laughed. Properly laughed. The sort of laugh I hadn't managed for years after Susan died. The officer slowly turned the first sheet of paper towards me. It was a photograph of Helen standing beside the sea in a pale blue coat. I recognized it immediately. She'd sent it to me during our first month of speaking. She had said her sister took it during a walk in Cyprus. Underneath the photograph was a printed name, Margaret Ellis, Brighton. I frowned. That isn't right. The officer placed another photograph beside it. Helen holding a mug in a garden. Another one of her smiling beside a row of beach huts. Then one taken at what looked like a family wedding. I had seen every one of them before, but each photograph now carried the same name, Margaret Ellis, not Helen Morris. My chair seemed to shift beneath me. I gripped the edge of the table. "That cannot be right," I whispered. "Helen sent me those herself." The officer's expression did not change. There was no satisfaction in her face. No judgment. Only care. "The woman in these photographs has never heard of you." For a moment, I thought I must have misheard. I looked from the photographs to the officer and then back again. "No. I'm afraid we've confirmed it." "No. She lives in East Sussex. She's staying with her sister in Cyprus. Margaret Ellis lives near Brighton." That's what I said. East Sussex. But she has never lived in Cyprus. The kitchen felt suddenly too warm. I loosened the top button of my shirt. She was a teaching assistant. She was an NHS receptionist. She lost her husband. That part appears to be true. I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "Appears to be true." The officer hesitated. Some of the personal details used in the messages may have been taken from Mrs. Ellis's public social media accounts. A faint ringing started in my ears. I remembered the stories Helen had told me about her late husband. The hall light he used to leave on when she came home late. The way he always overfilled the kettle. The photograph she had once sent of them standing together at a wedding. Had those memories belonged to Margaret as well? I reached towards one of the pages but stopped before touching it. My hands had begun to shake. "This woman," I said. "She knows about me. I believe the person contacting you has gathered a great deal of information." "No. She remembers things. That's often how trust is built." I looked towards the window. Outside. My small Worcester garden was dark except for the security light above the shed. Beyond the glass, Susan's climbing rose moved slightly in the wind. Helen had asked about that rose dozens of times. She had said it was the first thing she wanted to see when she visited. For nearly a year, I had believed a woman somewhere was thinking about me, waiting for me, planning a future with me. Now I could not recall a single clear moment when I had truly watched her speak. There had been blurred screens, frozen images, a glimpse lasting no more than a second or two, but never a real conversation. Never her face moving naturally while my name left her lips. I turned back to the officer. My voice sounded smaller than I remembered it. Then who have I been speaking to every night for the last 11 months? 5 years earlier, before any of those messages existed, my life had already become very quiet. Susan died in the spring. After 46 years of marriage, people often say a house feels different after someone dies. That is true, but not in the way I expected. The walls looked the same. The furniture stayed where it had always been. The boiler still rattled in the mornings and the front gate still caught on the paving stone. It was the small things that changed. Her gardening gloves remained on the shelf in the shed, one folded neatly inside the other. There were shopping lists in the kitchen drawer, written in her sloping handwriting. Milk, potatoes, birdseed, Peter's tablets. I found one months after the funeral and had to sit down. Her chipped blue mug stayed beside mine in the cupboard. I never used it, but I could not bring myself to move it. For nearly a year, 2 coats hung in the hallway, mine and hers. I knew perfectly well she would never wear hers again. Still, taking it down felt too final. At the dining table, I continued laying out 2 placemats without thinking. When I noticed, I would quietly put one back in the drawer. My days became orderly. Routine helped. I woke at 7, made breakfast, and listened to Radio 4 while eating toast at the kitchen table. Afterwards, I walked to the newsagent for the paper, even though I could have had it delivered. The walk gave me somewhere to go. The man behind the counter always said, "Morning, Peter." I always said, "Morning." That was sometimes the first conversation of my day. Twice a month, I volunteered at a community garden on the edge of Worcester. I repaired raised beds, checked loose paving, and offered advice nobody had asked for about drainage. Old habits from 40 years as a council building inspector were difficult to lose. At home, I mowed the lawn far more often than necessary. Susan used to laugh and say I treated the grass like a military parade ground. Without her there, I still trimmed the edges carefully. In the evenings, I watched quiz programs alone. I answered questions aloud. Sometimes I turned toward Susan's chair when I knew one she would have got right. Then I remembered. Emma rang every Sunday. "How are you doing?" "Dad, perfectly all right." "Are you eating properly?" "Of course." "Come and stay with us next weekend." "We'll see." We both knew that usually meant no. Daniel invited me to Bristol as well. He offered to collect me if I did not fancy the drive. I always found a reason not to go. The garden needed doing. I had a hospital appointment. The weather looked poor. The truth was simpler. I did not want my children to think I could no longer manage. They had jobs, homes, and families of their own. Susan and I had spent years teaching them to be independent. I could hardly punish them for succeeding. Besides, I was not completely alone. I spoke to neighbors over the fence. I chatted to the woman at Tesco when the queue was quiet. I knew the names of several people at the community garden, but those conversations had edges. They ended when the shopping was packed or the watering was finished. No one knew what I was thinking at 11 o'clock at night. No one noticed when I cooked enough shepherd's pie for 2 and stood staring at the second portion. No one heard me say, "Good night, love," to Susan's photograph before switching off the lamp. The loneliness was not dramatic. It was ordinary. That made it easier to hide. One Saturday, my next-door neighbors celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. They invited half the street into their garden. There were folding chairs, sausage rolls, and bottles of warm white wine sitting in buckets of melting ice. I enjoyed myself more than I expected. Then the evening ended. I watched couples finding their coats and asking each other whether they had remembered the house keys. One woman adjusted her husband's scarf before they left. Another reminded her wife not to forget the leftovers. Small acts. Nothing romantic. Yet I felt something tighten in my chest. When I returned home, the silence seemed to be waiting behind the front door. I switched on the hallway light, though I did not need it. Then I sat in the kitchen without taking off my coat. After a while, I opened Facebook to look at photographs Emma had posted of the grandchildren. Between the family pictures, a suggested group appeared. British gardens and quiet places. Susan had always loved roses, so I joined. At first, I only read other people's posts. Country gardens, churchyards, old benches beside canals. Then one evening, I uploaded a photograph of the climbing rose beside our garden bench. Susan had planted it 20 years earlier. I wrote, "It still flowers every summer, though the person who chose it is no longer here to see it." By bedtime, dozens of people had left kind comments. Most were brief. "Beautiful rose. So sorry for your loss. What a lovely memory." Then I noticed one that felt different. "Some plants become memories we are lucky enough to keep alive." The comment came from a woman named Helen Morris. I clicked on her profile. There were photographs of coastal paths, garden centers, and cups of tea beside open books. In several pictures, a silver blonde woman smiled gently at the camera. Her page looked ordinary, respectable, real. I felt strangely guilty for studying it too closely and closed the app. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. A private message had arrived. Helen had written, "I hope you do not mind me saying so, but your post about the rose stayed with me all evening." I read it twice, then once more. My finger rested above the reply button. I had not spoken privately to another woman since Susan died. Did I answer her, or close the phone and return to the silence? I already knew I answered her. At first, I kept it polite. "Thank you. My wife planted it. She always knew more about flowers than I did." I expected that to be the end of it. Instead, Helen replied almost at once. "My husband was exactly the same. He used to buy plants and then forget what they were called." I smiled at that. It sounded ordinary, not flirtatious, not intrusive, just one widowed person recognizing something in another. She told me her husband, David, had died 6 years earlier. She said grief had made her notice the strangest things. A dent in an old cushion, a mug left in the wrong cupboard, the sound of a key in the front door that never came. I understood every word. Our first conversation lasted about 20 minutes. When it ended, I put my phone down and told myself it had been pleasant. Nothing more. The next morning, there was another message waiting. Helen had sent a photograph of a pale pink rose. "My sister's garden in Cyprus." She wrote, "I thought you might like this one." That was when I learned she was staying abroad, temporarily. Her sister had undergone hip surgery and needed help around the house. Helen said she would return to East Sussex once the recovery was further along. Again, it all sounded perfectly reasonable. She never began with romance. That mattered. She asked what I had done before retirement. I told her I had been a council building inspector. "So, you were the man people avoided when they had built an extension without permission. That was planning control." I replied, "We were the ones who told them the walls might fall down." She sent a laughing face. After that, the questions became smaller. Did I prefer tea bags or loose-leaf tea? Which quiz program did I watch? Had I always lived in Worcester? Did Susan enjoy gardening more than I did? She remembered the answers. That was what drew me in. When I mentioned a hospital appointment for my knee, she asked about it 3 days later. When I complained that the boiler had started knocking again, she messaged the following evening, "Did you get it sorted? Or are you still pretending it will repair itself?" I laughed out loud. It had been years since anyone noticed those little things. Phone calls, however, were difficult. Helen explained that her sister slept during the day and became anxious when strangers rang. She startles easily since the operation, she said. So Helen sent voice notes instead. The first one lasted only 12 seconds. "Hello. Peter, I thought it might be nicer for you to hear my voice properly. Her voice was soft, slightly hesitant. Mathieu. It matched the woman in the photographs exactly as I imagined it should. I played it twice. Then, feeling rather foolish, a third time. Soon, voice notes became part of our routine. She sent one while watering plants on the terrace, another while making tea. Sometimes I could hear birds in the background or the faint sound of traffic. Those details made everything feel live, real. We began speaking about Susan and David. I told Helen about the time Susan drove halfway across Worcestershire because I had left my lunch on the kitchen counter. She was furious. I said, but she still brought it. Helen laughed. That is love after 30 years. Annoyed, but still bringing the sandwiches. Then she told me David always left the hall light on when she worked late, even if he had gone to bed. I knew he was waiting for me. There was something about that memory that stayed with me. Grief. We agreed. Lived in habits. Not in funerals. Not in grand speeches. In lights left on. In mucks. In lunches packed for two. My evenings began to change. I still watched the same programs. But now I had someone to message when a contestant gave a ridiculous answer. I still ate alone. But sometimes Helen sent a photograph of her supper and asked what I was having. The silence did not disappear. It simply stopped feeling quite so heavy. After several weeks, I suggested a video call. The moment I sent the message, I worried I had moved too quickly. Helen replied almost immediately, I would like that. We arranged it for Sunday evening. I changed my shirt twice, combed my hair, placed my phone against a stack of books because the angle made me look slightly less tired. At 7 o'clock, the screen lit up. For perhaps 2 seconds, I saw the blurred shape of a woman's face. Silver hair, a polo top. Then the picture froze. The call ended. A message arrived at once. I am mortified. The internet here is hopeless. I felt disappointed, but not suspicious. Technology failed all the time. I wrote back, do not worry. We will try again. Before bed, she sent one final voice note. One day soon. Peter. We will laugh about all these failed calls while sitting in the same room. I lay awake imagining it. A train journey. A hotel breakfast. Someone beside me again. Yet one small question remained. Why? After weeks of intimate conversations, had I seen her face for only 2 blurred seconds? Over the next 3 months, Helen became part of the structure of my day. I woke expecting her message. I went to bed waiting for her voice. Our conversation settled into something almost domestic. In the mornings, she sent photographs of tea beside an open window, or a short note about the weather in Cyprus. Cloudy here today. You would like it. Not too hot. Sometimes, she reminded me to take my tablets. Sometimes she complained about the news. I told her when the postman had left a parcel behind the bin. She told me when her sister had slept badly. Nothing about it felt dramatic. That was why it felt real. In the evenings, we spoke about places we might go when she returned to Britain. Helen suggested Bath. I want somewhere quiet, she said. No rushing. No crowded attractions. I suggested the Cotswolds. You would spend the whole time inspecting old walls. She teased. And you would stop at every antique shop. Exactly. We already understand each other. I began making small changes around the house. At first, I told myself they were overdue jobs. The guest room curtains had faded, so I replaced them. The bedside table looked uneven with only one lamp, so I bought another. I cleared a section of the wardrobe. I repaired the bench beneath Susan's climbing rose. Each task had a practical explanation, but I knew I was preparing for Helen. One evening, she told me about her son. They had once been close, she said. But an argument over her late husband's estate had damaged the relationship. He thinks I should have sold the house immediately. She explained. Did you? No. It was still my home. There was pain in her voice. He said some things I cannot forget. I told her children sometimes spoke harshly. When money and grief became mixed together, she went quiet. I worry about growing old without anyone I can trust. The words reached something in me. You can trust me, I said. After that, I felt protective of her. I began sharing more about my own life. I told her my pension was modest but reliable. I mentioned that the mortgage had been paid off years earlier. I spoke about the savings Susan and I had built carefully over decades. I did not give exact amounts. Helen never asked. That restraint reassured me more than any promise could have done. Around that time, I told Emma and Daniel that I had met someone. Emma sounded surprised, then pleased. Dad, that is lovely. We are only talking. You sound different. How? Lighter. Daniel was more cautious. Have you met her in person? Not yet. She is in Cyprus helping her sister. There was a short pause. Just make sure she is who she says she is. Dad. Ibristet. She has never asked me for anything. I did not say she had. You implied it. I only meant be careful. I ended the conversation more abruptly than I should have. His warning stayed with me for several days. So I suggested another video call. Helen agreed. The night before. She sounded excited, but an hour before the call, she messaged to say her sister had fallen in the bathroom. I cannot leave her. She wrote. Of course she could not. The following week, we tried again. This time, Helen said she had dropped her phone and the camera no longer worked. A third attempt ended before it began because of a power cut. Each explanation made sense by itself. It was only when I placed them side by side that they began to resemble something else. I did not want to do that. Instead, I told myself she was unlucky. Then one night, after I had visited Susan's grave, Helen sent a longer voice note. She said she understood how strange it must feel to care for someone new while still loving someone who had died. Her voice shook slightly. I never thought I would feel close to anyone again. She said. There was a pause. Then she whispered, I think I have fallen in love with you. I sat in the dark for several minutes. I listened again, then once more. At last, I pressed record. I believe I love you too. Saying it did not feel like betraying Susan. It felt like admitting I was still alive. After that, Helen became the person I turned to first. When Emma missed a Sunday call, Helen was there. When Daniel sounded impatient after a long day at work, Helen listened to my complaints. When I woke at 2 in the morning feeling the house close around me, she sent a message saying I mattered. Gradually, I began to believe she understood me more deeply than my own children did. But one question refused to leave. If Helen loved me enough to imagine a future together, why did every attempt to see her face end with another excuse? The first inconsistency was so small that I almost missed it. Helen and I were exchanging messages about the people we had lost. She had mentioned her late husband many times before. David. That was always his name. Then, one evening, she wrote, Michael used to say exactly the same thing. I stared at the message. Michael, I replied. There was a pause before the 3 little dots appeared. My brother-in-law. She wrote, I am tired. I mixed the names up. It was a reasonable explanation. People confuse names all the time, especially when they were stressed. I told her not to worry. Still, I remembered it. A few weeks later, I asked about the primary school where she had worked near Hastings. She had told me lovely stories about children bringing her drawings and forgetting their PE kits. What was the school called? I asked. Emma works in education. She might know it. Helen did not answer directly. She said the school had changed names after joining an academy trust. Then she asked whether my knee was still troubling me. The subject moved on. Again, I accepted it, but the questions did not disappear. They simply waited. One afternoon, Helen sent me a photograph of herself sitting at a cafe beside the sea. She wore a pale green dress and held a coffee cup with both hands. I recognized the dress. Months earlier, she had sent another photograph wearing exactly the same thing. That did not matter by itself. What troubled me was the light. The shadows fell across her face in precisely the same way, though the background was completely different. For a moment, I wondered whether the photograph had been altered. The thought made me feel ashamed. This was a woman who had listened to me speak about Susan, a woman who remembered my appointments and asked about the boiler. What sort of man studies the shadows in a photograph sent by someone he loves? I closed the image and said nothing. There were odd phrases too. Most of Helen's messages sounded perfectly natural. Occasionally, though, she wrote things I could not imagine hearing from anyone in East Sussex. I am in the hospital premises. Kindly understand me. I will explain you later. My sister has taken ill seriously. I once teased her gently. You are beginning to sound like a very formal headmistress. She replied with a laughing face. Living abroad is ruining my English. I wanted that to be true, so I let it be true. Then came another attempt at a video call. Helen blamed the problems on my old mobile. You need something newer, she said. The camera keeps losing the connection. I bought a tablet from an electrical shop in town. The assistant showed me how to position it and adjust the sound. On Sunday evening, I placed it carefully on the kitchen table. I wore the blue shirt Emma had given me for Christmas. At 7 o'clock, I sent Helen a message. Ready when you are. No reply. At 7:30, I tried calling. Nothing. I waited for 40 minutes. By 9, I felt foolish sitting there in a clean shirt in front of an empty screen. At midnight, her message arrived. Her sister had been taken to an emergency clinic. I could not think clearly enough to contact you. She wrote. My first reaction was irritation. Then guilt followed immediately. I apologized for even mentioning the missed call. The next week, Daniel visited. He noticed the framed photograph beside the television. Helen was standing near a row of beach huts, smiling into the wind. That her, he asked. Yes. Can you send me the picture? Why? Just curious. I should have refused. Instead, I forwarded it. The following day, Daniel rang Emma. I did not know it at the time, but he had searched the photograph online. The same face appeared on several different profiles. One belonged to a woman named Margaret Ellis, a retired NHS receptionist near Brighton. Another used the name Anne Reynolds. The photograph had even appeared in an online advertisement. Emma and Daniel agreed not to confront me until they knew more, but Emma could not hide her concern for long. When she visited the following Sunday, she asked quietly, Dad, have you ever managed a proper video call with Helen? I felt the familiar tension rise in my chest. We have tried. That was not what I asked. You both think I am some helpless old man who cannot recognize kindness. No. Dad. Yes. You do. She reached for my hand. I pulled it away. I have managed perfectly well for 5 years. This is not about whether you can manage. It is about you not liking that someone else makes me happy. Her face changed. I knew I had hurt her, but I was too angry to stop. Emma gathered her coat. At the door, she looked back. I am frightened for you. That is all. After she left, I told Helen everything. She listened without interrupting. Then she said softly, Perhaps they are worried about their inheritance. I rejected the idea immediately. My children are not like that. I am sure they are not. She replied, But money and property can make people protective. She did not mention it again. She did not need to. The thought had already been placed between us. And for the first time, instead of wondering whether Helen was hiding something from me, I began wondering whether my own children were. Was she simply comforting me, or quietly teaching me to distrust the two people most likely to protect me? 2 days after the argument with Emma, Helen sent me a voice note just after breakfast. I knew something was wrong before she said a word. Her breathing was uneven. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded strained. Peter, I am sorry. I do not know who else to tell. I put down my mug. What has happened? It is my sister. There was a pause. She has had complications from the operation. They took her back into a private clinic during the night. I stood without knowing why and walked towards the window. Is she all right? They say she needs treatment immediately. Helen sounded as though she was trying not to cry. The clinic will not continue until the account is settled. I frowned. Surely they cannot simply stop treating her. It is different here. Everything has become so confused. Then she explained that her British bank had frozen her account after she tried to make a large transfer from Cyprus. The security department wanted proof of identity. The documents were at her house in England. She said it might take 48 hours to resolve. How much do they need? I asked. Please do not offer. I only asked. I would never forgive myself for involving you. The amount was £2,400. It was not a sum I could ignore, but it was not enough to place my savings in danger either. At least. That was what I told myself. Helen refused once. Then again. You have already given me more support than I deserve. She said. It is only for 2 days. I know. But this is not your responsibility. The more she resisted, the more determined I became. After everything she had done for me emotionally, helping her felt almost overdue. I want to do it, I said. At last. She gave me the account details. The name did not belong to Helen. It belonged to a man she described as the clinic's finance officer. When I entered the information into my banking app, a warning appeared. This payment may be connected to fraud. Have you met the recipient in person? I hesitated. Then I selected the option confirming that I trusted the payment. I told myself banks displayed such warnings for everyone. Within minutes, the transfer was complete. Helen called me her hero. I told her not to be ridiculous. No. She replied. You have shown me what real love looks like. For the next few days, she was more attentive than ever. Morning voice notes, messages throughout the afternoon, promises that the money would be returned as soon as her account was restored. I felt closer to her than before. Helping her had not made me feel used. It had made me feel needed. But the repayment never came. Instead, a week later, another problem appeared. A parcel containing legal papers and jewelry from her late husband had been stopped by customs. Helen said the contents were valuable, but a release fee of £6,800 had to be paid first. Once the parcel arrived, she would sell one item and repay everything immediately. This time, I did not answer at once. The amount was too large to treat casually. Helen noticed my silence. I knew I should not have told you. It is not that. You think I am lying. I did not say that. After everything we have shared, I never imagined you would look at me like everyone else does. The hurt in her voice was worse than anger. I felt ashamed. I told myself that doubt was understandable, but unfair. This was not a stranger. This was the woman I loved. I transferred the money. After that came £4,500 for legal fees. Then $3,200 for a changed flight booking after her original ticket was supposedly canceled. Within 3 weeks, I had sent nearly £17,000. Each transfer appeared to be the final obstacle. Each one came with another promise that she would soon be home. Then Helen sent me a photograph. It showed a small diamond ring resting inside a velvet box. I bought this before my account was frozen. She wrote. I stared at it for a long time. Her next voice note arrived moments later. I planned to ask whether you would let me spend the rest of my life with you. I sat alone at the kitchen table and cried. Not because of the money. Because, for the first time since Susan died, someone was asking me to imagine a future again. After that, the payments no longer felt like warnings. They felt like sacrifices for the life waiting just beyond them. But one question remained. If Helen was truly coming home to marry me, why was every payment going to a different person I had never heard of? The next request was for £12,000. Helen said the money was needed to release the jewelry, settle the final legal charge, and secure a flight back to Britain. Once again, the payment details belonged to someone else. I entered the information into my banking app and pressed continue. This time, the transfer did not go through. A message appeared asking me to contact the bank. Within 10 minutes, a fraud prevention officer rang. Mr. Langford, we have temporarily blocked a payment from your account. I know. I authorized it. We need to ask a few questions before we can release the funds. Herr Polite. But I felt as though I were being examined. She asked who the money was for. A trusted friend. Have you met this person face to face? Not yet. Have you spoken to the account holder? No. But I know why the payment is being made. There was a pause. Has your friend asked you to send money to several different accounts? I felt heat rising into my face. This is a private matter. I understand. But the pattern concerns us. The officer explained that the payment would remain blocked for 24 hours. She suggested I speak to someone I trusted before trying again, because Emma was listed as an emergency contact on one of my accounts. The bank also advised me to involve her. That felt like an intrusion. I was 71 years old. I had managed household budgets, pension documents, and mortgage payments for decades. Now, a stranger at the bank was speaking as though I needed permission from my daughter to use my own money. When Emma and Daniel arrived that evening, I already knew why they had come. Daniel carried a folder. Emma looked tired. Dad, she said, please let us show you something. I know what this is about. Then look anyway. Daniel placed several printed pages on the table. The first showed the same woman, whose photograph stood beside my television, but the name underneath was not Helen Morris. It was Margaret Ellis. There were dates beside the photographs. Some had been posted online years before I ever joined the gardening group. Another page showed a profile using the name Ann Reynolds. A third used the same face in an advertisement. Daniel turned over more sheets. There was no record of Helen working at the school she had described. No trace of the employment history she had given me. There were also warnings from banks and police about romance fraud. I barely looked at them. Photographs get copied online all the time. That is exactly the point. Daniel said, you do not know that Margaret is the genuine account. Emma spoke quietly. Her page goes back more than 10 years. Dad. So Helen's profile was created last year. I pushed the papers away. You have decided she is guilty before speaking to her. Daniel leaned forward. Then let us speak to her. I looked at him. Ask her to video call now. No arranging it for next week. No time to prepare. Just call. She is at the clinic. Message her. I hesitated. Then picked up my phone. I wrote, can we have a quick video call? Emma and Daniel are here. Helen replied within a minute. I am in a hospital corridor. Cameras are forbidden here. Daniel shook his head. Ask her for a photograph holding up 3 fingers beside today's newspaper. That is humiliating. It is simple. I sent the request. Several minutes passed. Then a voice note arrived. Helen sounded hurt and frightened. I cannot believe you are allowing your children to interrogate me like a criminal. I glanced at Emma. She looked away. Helen continued. I have told you everything. I have trusted you with my heart. If that is still not enough, perhaps there is no future for us. My chest tightened. Then came the final sentence. If you truly believe in us, complete the transfer. Otherwise, please do not contact me again. Daniel swore under his breath. Emma said nothing. I felt trapped between them. On one side were the children I had known all their lives. On the other was the woman who had carried me through nearly a year of lonely evenings. Emma moved closer. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Dad, I do not care about your money. I looked at her. I care that someone is using Mom's absence to hurt you. The anger inside me weakened. She reached for my hand. Mom would never ask you to prove love through fear. That sentence stayed with me. I looked again at the blocked payment on my screen, then at Helen's trembling voice note. At last. I said, I will wait 24 hours. Daniel nodded. That is all we are asking. What I did not know was that he had already contacted Margaret Ellis through her genuine profile. At first, she believed he was attempting to scam her. After several careful messages, she agreed to speak by video call. The arrangement was made for the following evening. Nobody told me, and I had no idea that, for the first time in 11 months, I was about to see the real woman whose face I believed I had fallen in love with. The following evening, Emma and Daniel arrived just before 7. Neither of them said much. Daniel placed his laptop on the coffee table and connected it to the charger. Emma sat beside me on the sofa, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. I looked from one to the other. "What is this?" Daniel took a breath. "We have arranged for you to speak to Margaret Ellis." For a moment, I did not understand. Then I saw the same face I had been looking at for nearly a year appear on the screen. Silver blonde hair, gentle eyes, the familiar curve of the smile. But she was moving, properly moving. She adjusted her glasses, glanced nervously towards someone outside the room, and then looked directly into the camera. "Hello," she said. Her voice was nothing like Helen's. It was lower, more direct, completely unfamiliar. I could not answer. The woman on the screen looked frightened. "My name is Margaret Ellis," she continued. "Daniel told me someone has been using my photographs." I stared at her face. Every feature was the same, yet everything about her felt different. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "This must be some sort of mistake." Margaret shook her head. "I wish it were." She explained that she lived near Brighton and had worked as an NHS receptionist before retiring. She had never been a teaching assistant. She had never lived in Cyprus. She did not have a sister recovering from hip surgery, and she had never sent me a voice note. I leaned forward. "The rose photograph," I said. "The one from your sister's garden." Margaret looked confused. "I don't know what you mean." "The messages about grief. David leaving the hall light on. Our plans to visit Bath." Her expression changed. Not recognition. Pity. "I'm sorry, Peter. I have never spoken to you before today." The room became very still. I could hear the clock above the mantelpiece and the faint traffic outside. For months, I had believed the woman in front of me knew me better than anyone. Now she was looking at me as a stranger. Margaret explained that many of her Facebook photographs had once been public. Pictures of holidays, family gatherings, Herrgarten, even photographs of her late husband. Someone had copied them. She had no idea how many false accounts existed. "I feel sick thinking about it," she said. "Those memories were ours." I wanted to apologize. Though I had done nothing deliberately wrong, I believed you were her. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You believed the person hiding behind my face." Lauter. The bank's fraud team explained the rest. Some of Helen's voice notes had been altered using synthetic audio. Others appeared to come from a real woman connected to the network. The blurred video call had probably used a pre-recorded clip or a face manipulation filter. Those 2 seconds I had treated as proof had been carefully staged. Investigators had also traced the accounts receiving my money. One belonged to a student who had been paid to accept transfers. Another was linked to a man involved in an organized romance fraud network. The police believed more than one person had maintained the relationship. Different people may have answered my messages on different days. That explained the forgotten names, the strange phrases, the changes in tone, the moments when Helen seemed to forget conversations we had shared. There may never have been one, Helen. Under police guidance, I sought the final message. "I know the photographs belong to Margaret Ellis. I have spoken to her." For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the reply appeared. "Your family has poisoned you against the only person who loved you." My hands shook as I typed. "Video call me now." The message remained unread. A moment later, the profile photograph disappeared. Then the conversation vanished. 11 months of promises were gone in seconds. Margaret began crying quietly on the laptop screen. She said some of her late husband's photographs had also been copied. Private memories had been turned into tools. "I feel as though they have taken part of my life," she said. "I'm sorry," I replied. She shook her head. "You have nothing to apologize for. You were deceived as well." That was when I understood. I had lost money, trust, and the future I had imagined. Margaret had lost control of her own face, her memories, and the story of her marriage. We had both been used by people we had never met. After the call ended, I went upstairs to the guest room. The new curtains were still hanging neatly. The second bedside lamp stood untouched. A section of the wardrobe waited empty. I opened my phone and deleted the photograph of the engagement ring. Emma followed me to the doorway, but did not come in. I feel as though someone has died, I said. My voice broke, but there was never anyone there. And that left me with a question I did not know how to answer. How do you grieve a love that was real inside your own heart, when the person at its center never existed? The final £12,000 transfer never left my account. At first, that fact felt almost meaningless beside everything else I had lost. The money already gone seemed enormous. Nearly £17,000 had vanished into accounts, belonging to people I had never met, for emergencies that had never happened, on behalf of a woman who did not exist. Still, the bank had acted quickly enough to freeze some of the earlier funds. A few weeks later, Inspector Rachel Morris visited me at home. She sat at the kitchen table where I had once listened to Helen's voice notes while drinking my morning tea. We have recovered approximately £9,000, she said. I looked at her. 9,000. It may take some time before it is returned, but the funds have been secured. For the first time since the truth came out, I felt something other than shame. Not relief exactly, more like the faint sense that the damage had finally stopped spreading. What about the rest? Rachel's expression remained gentle. Some of it moved through several accounts before leaving the country. We may not recover everything. I nodded. I had expected that. The police had identified 2 people in Britain whose accounts had received my money. One was a university student who had been promised easy cash for allowing strangers to use his bank account. The other was a man who had recruited people in financial difficulty and persuaded them to receive transfers on behalf of the wider network. Neither of them had written the messages to me. Neither had pretended to love me, but they had helped the money disappear. The larger organization stretched across several countries. Rachel was honest from the beginning. There would be no single dramatic arrest that explained everything. No courtroom moment in which Helen removed a mask and admitted what she had done. There may never have been one Helen to arrest. My messages could have been written by several people taking turns. The affectionate voice notes may have come from one woman, altered by software. The photographs came from Margaret. The money requests came from whoever was on shift that day. It was colder than any explanation I had imagined. The relationship I had treated as deeply personal had been organized like office work. The police asked me to provide everything: screenshots, phone numbers, email addresses, bank receipts, dates of failed video calls, the photograph of the engagement ring. Every item I had once treasured became evidence. I sat for hours scrolling through the conversation. There were messages I remembered word for word. Have you taken your tablets? Sleep well, my darling. Soon we will be together. I forwarded each one into a police file. At first, I wanted nobody outside the family to know. I imagined the neighbors whispering, the volunteers at the community garden exchanging looks, people saying, how could he not have realized? I told Rachel I was not certain I wanted to give a formal statement. She closed the folder in front of her. Mr. Langford. The people responsible study grief, trust, and loneliness. They are professionals. I looked away. She continued quietly. Your shame protects them, not you. That sentence stayed with me. A week later, I returned to the station and gave a full statement. I described Susan's death, the gardening post, the first message, the failed calls, the payments. I did not leave out the parts that made me feel foolish, especially those parts. Margaret also took action. She reported every false profile she could find and strengthened the privacy settings on her genuine account. A regional fraud awareness team asked whether she would record a short warning about stolen photographs. She agreed. Lauder. They asked me to record a separate message about emotional manipulation. We did not appear together. That felt right. We were not a love story. We were 2 strangers harmed by the same lie. Emma and Daniel came round one Sunday afternoon. There was no folder this time. No laptop. Just tea and a packet of biscuits Daniel had brought from the garage shop. I apologized for accusing them of caring about my inheritance. Emma's eyes filled immediately. I never wanted your money, Dad. I know that now. Daniel rubbed his hands together and stared at the floor. I was too harsh. You were frightened. I was angry because I could see what was happening and could not stop it. Emma reached across the table. We did not need you to be right. We only needed you to let us stay beside you. He held her hand. My children had not merely stopped another payment. They had stopped me from becoming completely isolated from everyone who genuinely loved me. The justice was not perfect. Several suspects were arrested. But the wider network remained under investigation. I recovered some of the money. Not all of it. Margaret could never fully take back the photographs already copied. I could never erase the 11 months I had spent believing in Helen. But the final transfer was stopped. Accounts were frozen. Warnings were issued. Other potential victims were contacted. And I no longer remained silent. The people behind the fraud had taken my money and borrowed my hope. I would not give them my voice as well. Yet after all of that, one fear remained. Could I ever trust another person again without wondering whether every kind word was only another performance? Several months later, I returned to the community garden. For a while after the fraud, I had avoided it. I told people my knee was troubling me, or that I had appointments. But the truth was simpler. I was ashamed. I imagined everyone somehow knew. I pictured them lowering their voices when I approached or wondering how a retired building inspector, a man who had spent his working life noticing cracks and weak foundations, had failed to see what was happening in his own home. But when I finally walked through the gate again, nobody questioned me. One of the volunteers handed me a pair of gloves and said, "Good. You can sort out that loose edging before someone trips over it." That was all. No judgment. No pity. Just a job that needed doing. I cannot explain how comforting that felt. I began volunteering regularly again. The mornings gave me structure. But more importantly, they placed me among people. Real people. People whose faces moved when they spoke. People who forgot what they had told me the week before and admitted it rather than inventing another story. People who made tea badly and laughed when the rain ruined an afternoon's work. Slowly, ordinary life began to feel safe again. A local fraud awareness group invited me to speak at a meeting for older residents. My first instinct was to refuse. I did not see myself as someone with advice to give. I had trusted the wrong person. I had ignored my children. I had sent thousands of pounds to strangers. What authority did that give me? Then I remembered Inspector Morris's words. My shame protected them, not me. So I agreed. The meeting took place in a small room at the community center. There were folding chairs, a temperamental kettle, and a plate of biscuits. Nobody touched until the talk began. I stood at the front holding a few notes. Though I barely looked at them, I was not looking for excitement. I said, I was not trying to marry someone young or glamorous. I was looking for someone who remembered to ask whether my boiler had been repaired. A few people nodded. That was the part I wanted them to understand. The fraud had not begun with diamonds, luxury holidays, or impossible promises. It began with a rose, a coupe of thé, a question about my knee, the sort of care that seems too ordinary to be dangerous. Afterwards, a widowed man waited until everyone else had left. He told me he had been speaking to someone online who always avoided video calls. I have not sent anything, he said quickly, but she has started mentioning trouble with her bank. I did not tell him what to do. I simply suggested he speak to his daughter and contact his bank before making any decision alone. He thanked me. For the first time, I felt that telling the truth about what happened might help someone else avoid it. That did not erase the humiliation, but it gave it somewhere useful to go. A few days before Christmas, a card arrived from Brighton. I recognized Margaret's name on the envelope. Inside, she had written, "Neither of us chose what happened, but neither of us allowed it to define us." I read the sentence several times. Then I placed the card beside a framed photograph of Susan, not because Margaret and I had formed any sort of romance. We had not. We exchanged only occasional messages. The card mattered because it was honest. No hidden request. No invented emergency. No promise of a future designed to make me lower my guard. Just one victim acknowledging another. Upstairs, The guest room still had the new curtains I had chosen for Helen. For weeks, I could not bring myself to enter it. Eventually, I removed the second bedside lamp. I considered turning the room back into storage. Instead, Emma brought the grandchildren to stay one weekend. They filled the wardrobe with trainers and coats. They left books on both bedside tables and crumbs beneath the bed. The room I had prepared for an imaginary future became part of my real family life again. I still missed the woman I thought Helen was. That may be difficult for some people to understand. I knew she had never existed. Yet the happiness I felt during those months had been real to me. So was the grief? I no longer felt ashamed of that. My feelings had been genuine. The identity was false. There is a difference. What I understand now is that loneliness did not make me weak. Keeping it hidden made me easier to separate from the people who loved me. Had I spoken honestly to Emma and Daniel earlier, perhaps the fraud would not have gone so far. Perhaps I would have allowed them to stand beside me before hope turned into fear. One spring morning, I sat on the repaired bench beneath Susan's climbing rose. New flowers had begun to open along the wall. For years, I had believed that trusting the wrong person proved I was a fool. In the end, it taught me something else. Losing trust does not mean you must stop living. It only means you should never face the next beginning alone. And I often wonder this now. If someone you loved refused every chance to be seen, how long would hope stop you from asking why?